going to replace the chain and front and rear sprockets on the SV650 today. So the first thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you get your bike up on a suitable stand. And I've got a stand set up here. It's a T-Rex stand, and it gets the bike set up. Now, I'm not going to cover as to how to put your bike up on a stand today. We'll do that some other day. You want to make sure that you can get the front sprocket off, which is this guy right here. It has a nut on it. It's a big nut, and it looks like the clutch linkage is going to be in the way. Okay, there it is. The linkage is now disassembled. The clutch cable, we're just going to push it up and out of the way, and that's going to give us enough clearance we need to get to that bolt that's on the front sprocket. There's a locked washer that's bent around this nut. You want to take a hammer, and I use a beat up old screwdriver, and you go ahead and you just tap the edge of it. I've been told a million different times by a million different people that it's impossible for a mortal man to loosen this. Even the dealerships say that. But if you climb over the bike like this, you put your weight on the brake pedal on the right hand side, and you get your ratchet ready, you too can break this sucker free. That's all there is to it. Continue to turn it, the nut will come out, as will the washer, and then there's your sprocket. Turn your wheel around until you find the master link. The master link is usually the one with the clip, and you can see just how badly worn the chain and the sprocket are in this case. You can pull that thing out really, really far here. Anytime you can lift that and you can expose the teeth, you know your chain and your sprocket are shot. Looking at the master link, you want to go ahead and undo the clip on it. And the clip is usually really easy to get to and easy to undo with a pair of needle nose pliers. Just click, and she's off. That's it. Then you pull off the front plate, and then fish out the old chain. And the old chain is just hanging about, so it's as simple as just pulling it out. And since the front sprocket nut is off and the chain is now off, the whole sprocket will actually just slide right off the counter shaft. And that's all there is to it, removing it. Now, we got the new sprocket removed from its package, and you want to make sure it's the same amount of teeth, in this case it is, and you also want to make sure that it's going to fit on that shaft. Some sprockets also have an orientation on it. In the case of the SV650, there is no wrong way because it's flat. It's flat on both sides, so it doesn't matter which way you put it on. I usually like to face them with the label in for that sleek look. Some people like to face it out so they can show what it is. But in the case of the SV, as I said, it really doesn't matter. So we're going to go with the stealthy look, and we're going to put it on just like so. Boom, that's it. You want to get your nut and your washer ready once again to go back on, and just have those waiting so that way you don't lose them. So that way they're on here ready to go for when you're ready to tighten this up again. I'm going to remove the clip from the rear. So remove the clip that comes out of the rear nut, and then go ahead and get a ratchet that fits on it so we can go ahead and just loosen them. The whole axle does not turn, so I don't require a wrench on the other side. Pull out all these little pieces. You don't want to lose them, so make sure you put them down someplace where they'll be safe. And then you're going to push the axle on through. Sometimes the axle requires a little bit of coaxing, so take an old screwdriver and a hammer and just gently tap it through. Once you get it started, usually the axle will just pull right out and your wheel falls right down. Make sure you find your spacers so you don't lose any. Make sure you remember exactly where they came from, because they're going to have to go back in oriented the exact same way they came out. Now if you've gotten your rear axle out, you've got your chain off, the whole wheel should just pull right out of the swing arm. So just pull. There it is. It's out. It's important to find the proper size socket to fit onto those sprocket bolts. So once you've got those on there, you want to make sure you brace that wheel and loosen these guys. I like to Loctite them, so sometimes they're really hard to break free. Alright, on some bikes you have threaded studs, on other bikes you have actual bolts, and on some bikes, like the SV, there's actually carriage bolts that hold this thing together. So when you loosen the nut on the back, the bolt's going to come out the back side. The whole sprocket will come right off the face of the carrier, just like so. Okay, now as I mentioned before that there's carriage bolts that go in here, so you want to put them in from the back side of the sprocket carrier, drop them on in, and you make sure that the notch lines up with the backside of the sprocket carrier so it doesn't turn. And this is important, or else when you start turning the nut on the other side, it's just going to spin around, or it's going to hang up in an inappropriate place, and you'll have a problem. But now we've got that, you put the sprocket on, and make sure you get one of the washers and one of the nuts set up, and drop it right on. And what I like to do is I like to put a little bit of Loctite on these when I assemble them. So we'll put that on there too, and repeat the same process for the other four that's all the way around. Now this here is your cush drive, and there's little rubbers, and these are used for keeping the stresses off the transmission if the wheel should get a jerking motion from a pothole or a speed bump or something along the lines of that. That stops the gears from chipping apart. But make sure that these are in here, make sure that they're clean. When I took the sprocket carrier off, they fell out. So make sure that you've got them picked up and that you have them put back in there and they're nice and clean and ready to go. And then just drop it right into those rubbers. And it's going to align a certain way with them to make sure that it's in there. And once you've got that put back into the wheel, you can go ahead and torque down the bolts to their appropriate specification. Now what you didn't see in between is I have put Loctite on each one of these too, just to make sure that they will stay tight. Now these nuts are lock nuts, so they'll lock themselves, but I like to add a little bit of blue Loctite to them just to make sure that they stay on. Alright, we got the sprocket and sprocket carrier back assembled in the wheel. We got all the bolts torqued down to the manual specification. We're ready to put the wheel back on the bike. And I'm sure that anybody that does this kind of work will agree that the hardest thing is putting the wheel back in and getting the brake caliper, the spacers, the sprocket carrier, swing arm, and the wheel all aligned at the same time so you can shove that rear axle back into place. So that's what we're going to do right now, and hopefully it'll be kind of quick so that way it looks nice on camera. Now always put a little bit of grease on the axle before you shove them on in there. So make sure that gets taken care of so that way it doesn't bind up the next time you try to remove it. And there it is. We got all the spacers back in place correctly. We need to put back on any washers that are on the outside, and then get the nut put back on as she belongs to. Now we're going to come back to this. We're not going to tighten this up just yet. And it's important because we have not put that chain on. Give it a spin and make sure it's not binding up. And if all is good, you're ready to proceed to the next step. We're going to take this chain, we're going to wrap it right around this sprocket in the back, rolling it forwards the whole time, bringing it to the front of the bike. And then you want to up to the front and go around the front sprocket. Once you've got it that far, it should be easy to just pull it through on the bottom and to bring the two ends of it together. You want to make sure that you get your O-rings put onto the master link like so, and you get them nice and greased up. Then you want to take them and shove them right on through the chain from the back side, and that's going to make it a whole lot easier to get to from the front side when you go to put the front plate on. Now the two front O-rings, make sure they're nice and greased up because they're going to serve two purposes with the grease. One, it's going to lube them, and two, it's going to glue them in place to hold them there so they don't fall out. Then you want to take the actual plate itself, because this is not one of those clip-on types. This is one of the rivet-on types master links. So I will have to get this on here, and I'm going to have to get the tool, and it's going to be very, very difficult to keep the camera oriented while I'm wrapping myself around this, but we're going to give it a try. Alright, we have a nice riveted on chain. So that chain is nice and solid now. Get this bolt snugged up. Then you're going to want to torque this to the appropriate specification. Then we need to bend this washer back over that nut to prevent it from backing off. So usually it takes just a couple shots with the hammer. Now we want to make sure that our clutch linkage goes back on, and the easiest way to do this is to make sure your linkage is all assembled, just like so. Feed your clutch cable through this here, and then put the linkage back together where it belongs. Tighten this down to specification, and be done with it. Depending upon the kind of bike you have, you got chain adjusters back here. Every bikes are a little bit different. But you want to go ahead and pull these back and tighten them up on both sides. And there's two things you want to look out for. You want to make sure that this chain is straight. And you want to make sure that it's straight across the top. So you look in this way, and you make sure that the chain doesn't look like it's swinging one side or the other. If it is, you simply make the adjustment on this side, or go back to the other side and make the adjustment over there. You want about 1.5 inches of chain play, right in through here. So once you've got that set to where you think it needs to be, measure this with a ruler. It should bounce up and down about 1.5 inches and no more. If you've got that set correctly, then go ahead and tighten down your wheel. You want to tighten up this nut to the appropriate torque spec, and then once you've got it to torque, you want to tighten it even more than spec, but just so that the little hole that's in there lines up with the notches in the nut. And this is important because that is the location where you're going to put in your pin. And the pin must go through that little hole, and this is what keeps that nut from coming off the axle while you're going down the road at 80 miles an hour.